Hello and welcome to the Pen Man. Today I'm going to talk about something that is pretty much taboo in the fountain pen world, or at least perceived as taboo, and that is, as the video description states, eyedroppering a metal fountain pen. If you'll notice, just about every review on a metal fountain pen, the reviewer, including myself, I've often done this, will put a disclaimer that as they describe the materials that the pen is made of, that this pen, if it's metal, it is not recommended to eyedropper because of the fear that the metal components will react adversely to the ink that you're using. Now, with this video, I made an experiment a couple of years ago that lasted over a course of a year and a half. And what I did in that experiment, well, I'll get to that in a moment. My first question is, why would anybody want to eyedropper a fountain pen anyway? And there's a question for you. If you like to eyedropper your fountain pens, please put in the comments below why you like to eyedropper them, and perhaps the pen that you use to eyedropper. And even more so, more interesting, what I would like to hear is if you have a metal fountain pen that you eyedropper and what has been your experience with doing that. Okay, so basically for those of you who might be very new to the fountain pen world and you're wondering what in the world is eyedroppering a fountain pen, that's when you take the body of the fountain pen, you disassemble the grip section from the body where you normally put your cartridge in or your converter in, and you take the body and you fill that with fountain pen ink and then assemble that, reassemble, and now you have this great capacity of ink in your fountain pen. And that really is the reason why people will want to eyedropper their fountain pen, is for ink capacity. Well, the second question is, why do you need that much ink capacity? For instance, I think it's the Noodler's Ahab. You can get that in a piston version or a eyedropper version. The eyedropper version will hold 6 milliliters of ink. So that's a lot of ink. Why would you need that much ink to begin with? Some people might say, well, I'm going to be going on a long trip and I don't want to have to bring along a separate bottle of fountain pen ink and the syringe to use to fill it, and if necessary, and all of that. I just don't want to deal with it. I want to fill my fountain pen and not have to worry about it on my trip because there's probably no place to get ink there or whatever. That's legitimate. Perhaps you are a student in a school, you handwrite your notes and you do a lot of note taking. That's legitimate. You don't want to run out. Perhaps you are in your business, your line of work, you are doing a lot of writing and you don't want to have to stop in the middle of the day to try to figure out how to get some ink in your pen, especially if you're at a conference and you're right in the middle of a speaker and speaker's presentation, and you run out of ink. I mean, nobody likes to do that. So that's One reason that gives you that extra bit of security that you got a ton of ink and you are not going to run out. Okay, so those are the reasons why. Now, I'm going to still deal with some other issues surrounding this, as far as the necessity or the lack thereof for eyedroppering a fountain pen. But in the meantime, I'm going to head over to my desk, and I have an experiment that I did a few years ago. It's becoming many years ago, I think. And what I did, after hearing some reviewers talk about, always putting in this disclaimer that it's not advisable to eyedropper your fountain pen. And even one very well known and respected, and rightly respected, fountain pen repairer, Nimmeister, was bemoaning how some modern and well-known and quality pen makers continue to put a metal ring around the end of the grip section of the fountain pens, just before the nib, because most of the time when you're filling a fountain pen, if you have a converter, you're dipping that metal section is dipping into your fountain pen, and you're sucking that up. Or you get those fountain pens that have the whole section as metal, bare metal. So that, he was decrying that. And so I really wondered, man, does it really make that much of a difference? Is it really going to destroy a fountain pen? Well, I did this experiment where I took a Diamine ink, Monteverde, a Noodler's ink, and a Private Reserve ink. And I soaked the various components, metal components, plated, chrome plated, 24 karat gold plated, sterling silver plated materials. I threw in some brass tubes, which normally on the metal pen, that's what's going to be lining the inside of your metal pen that's maybe has a lacquer finish on the outside, but it's more than likely going to be a brass interior of that pen. And then other components, metal components, are plated with different platings. And I wanted to see how it would affect this. So I put these components in different inks, and over the course of 1 year for some of them and a year and a half for some others, I had them in these little bottles, and I would occasionally agitate the bottles, make sure that everything is getting covered and it's sitting. So they sat in there. So we're going to go, and I'm going to show you that experiment, and then come right back, and we will talk a little more about the necessity or the lack thereof of eyedroppering your fountain pen. Okay, so here we have the inks that I used. The Noodler's Red Black. We had a Diamine and a Monteverde, not sure what colors they were. And then the Private Reserve Electric DC Blue. So I figured the red black would be very saturated. I tried to use highly saturated inks for the experiment. Now what I did, here were the components that I used. These are plated. These are chrome, three chrome plated components. These are the bands on some pens that I made. They weren't necessarily fountain pens, but same kind of plating and so forth. It'd be brass and chrome plated. And then got three of those. One that's gold plated, and then one that I believe this was sterling silver. All right. Then I have these three components. These are the brass inserts, the tubes inside the body of the pen. And this is a body finial that has black lacquer, and these as well are lacquered, black lacquered brass types of fittings. This one almost looked like it was a copper insert, but inside. But anyway, so I'm going to take you a little bit closer here. All right, so let's look at these. Remember, I left these things soak in these inks for a year, a whole year. All right, put these in the middle there somewhere. Okay, this is chrome plated. All right, so you can see around there. I mean, do you really see chunks of deterioration? See if I can get the close up a little bit on the threads there. Gonna see inside the threads. All right, so nothing. All right, nothing. And that's the same with, you know, here's another chrome. Some of that, just a tad bit rough around, sorry, just a tad bit. I mean, I can kind of feel a little bit there. But again, the threads, there's a little spot there, and that's just discoloration. Okay, so those are there. And then this one's really, really clean. So again, a lot depends on the ink that you're using, and most of them, like your Diamines, your Monteverdes, and some others that, you know, they don't hurt at all. Here's a 24 karat gold plated. It soaked for a year, at least. And then this, I believe, was sterling plated. Sterling silver. There we go. Just try to give you a little look all the way around. Okay, so it's not like big chunks were coming out of this or really messing up. All right, here are the parts that were enameled. So there's inside. It's just discoloration there. That's all you're looking at there. Here's a part on the outside. I mean, you can't even really see anything there. And then here's the exposed, unpainted metal. Now this one, I don't know if this had been in the Noodler's Black. This one, obviously, the enamel started coming back. Coming off. You could see the brass underneath that. So maybe this was the 1.5 year one here. Plus, again, I was agitating them, so I don't know if, you know, that helped to knock some of that off. I don't know. Anyway, here's the inside of that. So there would be nothing functionally wrong. Okay, so here's the next is the brass fittings. Okay, a lot of discoloration because this was a nice pretty brass when it went into the ink. Let's see, get the inside of that there. Now it's kind of rough around the edges, the ends there, but that's just from the bandsaw. I use to cut these up with. All right, so again, it's not like, and it hasn't thinned out. I mean, that I could tell at all. Here's another one. Not sure what color all of these were in, but obviously this one was greatly discolored. But this is going to be inside your pen. Nobody's going to see it. You're not going to see it. So it gets discolored. Discolored. Scolored. Oops. But, you know, again, these are the inks that I used, and it wasn't, they weren't, I didn't see any damage. I mean, some discoloration, yes, and of course, you know, some of the enamel, but you're not talking enamel inside your pen, you know, where it's going to touch. And these things soaked. They soaked for a year and a half. It's just totally what is not going to happen to your pen. You're not going to soak your pen in ink for a year. You're gonna go through it. You know, after a period of time, if you write, like maybe you do write novels, and you know, you go through it fast. But you know, when you empty it out, you clean it out, right? And you flush it, and just like you would normally do your pen maintenance. So, and that's not going to be every 6 months even. You're not even going to have whatever this is, whatever deterioration there might be if you went microscopically and did what kind of measurements that way. You know, you're not going to have that on your metal pen. So anyway, that's I'm not telling you to eyedropper your metal pens, so don't sue me. But I'm just saying, they keep saying don't do this. Because it could harm your pen, but I'm just saying I want to do an experiment. This is my experiment. Take it for what it's worth. Enjoy your pens. Did you find that interesting? I personally found that interesting. Doing that experiment, it was fun when I did it. It was eye-opening, and it gave me some confidence that if I wanted to eyedropper my metal fountain pen, I don't think I had a lot to risk there. Let's get back to the question, is it really necessary to eyedropper a fountain pen? When you talk about you're wanting to have a lot of ink capacity because you don't want to run out. Well, I did a little research on ink capacities and you know how much you might need. And there's one person, they kind of did some writing experiments and so forth. Anyway, it came down to these numbers. They said a one milliliter amount of ink will, with a fine nib, and of course take into consideration the absorbency factor of the paper that you're using. If it's cheap paper, it's going to absorb more and so forth. And also the viscosity of the ink. Is it going to be a real wet ink, you know, flow real good through your nib and feed, or is it going to be a little drier ink that's, you know, going to last a little bit longer? So, you know, you take those into consideration. But here are the numbers that they come up with. A fine nib will write 64 pages. A medium nib, 25 pages. A broad nib, 20 pages. And a 1.5 stub will write 7 to 10 pages. I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, so that's 1 milliliter of ink. And then, just for perspective here, how much does a standard international cartridge short hold? It holds 0.7 milliliters of ink. A standard international long holds about 1.45, 1.5 milliliters of ink. And then a converter, standard international converter, you know, again, there's international converters that might vary a little bit in their ink capacity. Let's say a Schmidt converter, for instance, should hold about 0.86 milliliters of ink. So it's all those pages where that you can write. Most of us, most fountain pen users, according to a survey I did a while back, use fine nibs with the close second of medium, and then they go down from broad and extra fines and 1.5, so forth. So fine and medium are going to be your most used nibs. 65 pages, 25 pages, fine, medium. That's a lot of writing, and you should be able to refill. In most situations, you should be able to refill before you ran out anyway. Now, if you do need to, you still, at the end of the day, you still want to be able to eyedropper your pen. There are pens that you can buy that'll give you a decent amount of ink capacity that you won't have to worry about. You can eyedropper it. Again, I think I mentioned earlier the Noodler's Ahab. Their eyedropper version is 6 milliliters. As far as piston fillers, their piston, the Ahab piston, is 2 milliliters. Sailor Pro Gear is 1.2. Pelican 205 is 1.54 milliliters. A Pilot Custom 823 holds about 2.5 milliliters. I mean, that's a good amount of ink. I have a 823, and I mean, when I fill that thing, it takes forever for me to run that pen out. TWSBI Eco, there's a cheaper alternative right there. That's 1.75 milliliters. The VAC 700 is a 2.1 milliliter. Diamond 580 is 1.95 milliliter. So there are options out there. Now, if you really want some holding capacity, and you got a metal, you're bent on trying to do your metal pen, a Metro will hold 4.5 milliliters. I just checked that on mine, and the X750 will hold 6.5 to 7 milliliters of ink. I mean, that's a lot of ink, and you should never have to run out of ink there. Here's some suggestions. Number one, if you really need ink capacity, either buy some, and depends on your financial ability, obviously, but for instance, if you got a couple of TWSBI Ecos, you could fill each one of those with ink, and you've got a lot of ink capacity there. Or what you could do also is buy some standard international cartridges if your pen takes those. If you don't like the ink that's in them, suck it out with a syringe, clean it, flush it out with a syringe, and then put in your own ink and take some silicone, not grease, but silicone caulking, and just put enough in there and over the lip to hold that in there. And then when you're ready to use it, pull it out. Don't puncture into your pen, but just pull that out, and then you should be able to use it. Or do that with a short, and just take a box and fill all the cartridges with the type of ink you want, and you're ready to go. Or you could get a 30 milliliter, those small bottles of ink, and just, if you're traveling, you're going to be flying, you don't want them leaking, so put some grease, silicone grease around the threads there, and then put it in a Ziploc baggie, and you should be pretty safe, I think. Now, I haven't tried that, but I think you should be safe. So again, it comes down to, do we really need to? Except for the fact that you don't like refilling your pen. For me, I can't think of any reason why I would need to eyedropper my pen. But if you think you do, I've done that experience. Take it for experiment. Take it for what it's worth. And, you know, if you feel like, oh, that looks okay, I'm going to try it. You know, more power to you. But again, there's the disclaimer. You know, don't sue me. I'm not telling you that, you know, you're never going to have any problem. But, you know, that's just, I personally don't think it is. And in fact, I'm not going to take one of my diplomats and do this first, you know, so maybe there's just that little bit of hesitation, but I'm going to take my, you know, cheap Jinhao X750, and I'm going to give that a whirl. I'm going to eyedropper it, and perhaps in 6 months or so, come back, and boy, let's see what it looks like at that point, okay? And then we'll, you know, maybe that'll give you a little more confidence. Also, I have to point out, I can't remember if I already pointed that out, but when I did this experiment, I was keeping in mind modern pens. I'm not talking about, you know, your great-grandfather's pen that's been an heirloom to you, is special, and you don't want to take any risk, which I wouldn't blame you. And I'm not advocating, I'm not saying that you should go out and eyedropper. I don't think anybody needs to personally, but if you do. So I'm not talking about older pens, I'm talking about fairly modern, you know, modern to fairly modern pens and more modern inks. So I'm not talking about using iron gall inks or pigmented inks. I'm talking about your typical fountain pen inks. Most of them today, your Diamines, Monteverdis, there's some debate on Noodlers, some of their saturated stuff, you know, so, and then, you know, all your Parker, Waterman, Mont Blanc, those inks should all be safe. I mean, they're made for fountain pens, you know, not necessarily eyedroppering the metal ones, but they're made for fountain pen use, and they're formulated to be gentle on your fountain pens in the components. So I thought this would be a good experiment. I thought I would like to share it with you. I've mentioned it in some of my previous videos about, you know, I'm going to show you guys one of these days this video and or this experiment, and so here it is. And again, perhaps I will see you in about 6 months. All right, this is the end of 19. I'm dating myself. The end of 2022, and we're getting ready to get into 2023. So I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, which is tomorrow at the recording, as well. Wish you a most joyous 2023. All right, take care.